Splatoon 2 can seem like a simple game to play and be good at, but don't let the colorful visuals fool you. Splatoon 2 is a tough game to play at a high level. Today, I'm going to dive into some concepts that, if implemented, will help make you a better Splatoon player. The first concept is awareness, or the knowledge and perception of what is happening around you. A good example of how awareness affects your play is how effective you are when you do or do not look at the squids at the top of the screen. Not looking at the squids at the top of the screen is something that I would reckon everyone who has played the game has been guilty of at some point, and immediately has an impact on your gameplay if you do it. Utilizing the information the HUD or heads up display gives you is a big help to any player. It sounds incredibly simple, but it really does have an impact. It lets you know when to engage, when to play defensive, if you have an advantage while you're pushing, that sort of thing. The HUD also shows you when people have their specials available. This is incredibly important. Consider this. Are you going to want to grab a Rainmaker when the enemy charter has Stingray? Or jump on the tower when the enemy has a Booyah Bomb on deck? Or drop into the zone when all four of your opponents are alive, you're the last one alive, and they have armor? I don't think so. The utilization of HUD information is just a small part of the concept of the knowledge portion of awareness in Splatoon 2. It is also important to be knowledgeable of all the most basic information the game gives you, and take advantage of it as much as you can. The more information at your disposal, the more aware you can be, and the more aware you are, increases the odds of you making better and smarter plays. Another important part of the knowledge portion of awareness is having a solid understanding of what every single weapon can do. The footage on screen shows me just messing around the testing room, but I'm testing stuff like how many shots after different bombs does it take certain weapons to kill, how many tap shots each charger takes, the different amounts of damage blaster indirects do depending on how close they are to the target, or even something like bonking a target with a baller doing 50 damage. That sort of stuff can help you figure out in game what combos your weapon can pull off. But the knowledge of what your weapon can do is not just about the damage and different things it can combo into. It's also certain stuff like how to peek with a charger, or how to get more damage on a roller flick if you angle it downward, or how a blobber can hit around walls by ricocheting. Knowing the ins and outs of your weapon and your weapon's toolkit are vital to understanding what you can do in every single situation. Now, some weapons are objectively worse than others, but every single weapon does have its strengths. Awareness of not only your weapon, but how you are playing your weapon is also important to your improvement. Remember to be flexible. This can be a struggle for newer players or stubborn veterans. Sometimes you just might need to switch weapons, or switch strategies or play styles, or where you shark, what role you're trying to play, that sort of thing. Exposing yourself to as many different situations as possible is how you grow more and more in game. If you only play blasters, for example, sure, you'll understand them great after a while, but if you get stunted on by a splatter shot, let's say, over and over again, do you think doing the same thing against it is going to help? No, of course not. Maybe you need to switch to a weapon that outranges it, or outpaints it, or just change how you approach, how you paint, that sort of thing. Now, in regards to switching weapons, I recommend that everyone, and I mean everyone, learn every single weapon class, even if it's just for fun or messing around in turf war or private battles. It is a great idea because it gives you a baseline of understanding for every single encounter you can have. Information in Splatoon is key. The more you know, the better off you are. You never know what a situation or encounter might call for, and knowing exactly what your opponent has at their disposal, as well as what you have at your disposal, allows you to decipher exactly where you might have an edge in encounters, over the course of a game, or over the course of a long session of playing. Now, seeing how important information is to improvement, let's take a quick look at all the factors that go into a match. The map you play on is huge. That's probably the biggest first factor. That determines the amount of paint you can get total surface area wise on the map. It also determines the verticality of fights. On a flatter map like Port Mackerel, there isn't that much height difference, but on a map like, let's say, Moray Towers, there's a lot of height difference, so that affects how you fight. The map also affects the obstacles you have, whether they be impeding your progress or allowing you to do stuff like hide behind them or peek with a charger. The map also determines the hazards you have to avoid, like water on some maps, the rare chance that a fan on Anchovy will splat you, that kind of thing. The map also determines where your weapon can paint and where it can't. Take Kelp Dome, for example. You can't paint on the grates, obviously, but you can paint below them. Now, the second biggest factor is the mode. This determines what areas of the map will be the hottest, or put another way, which areas of the map will see the most action and traffic. It also determines what abilities you might run, what weapon you might pick, what comp you might choose if you play competitively, what role you play. The list goes on. The next factor I'd say is probably the abilities you run. They determine how fast you move in both kid and squid form, whether you are safer when you're jumping in, how fast you jump, how fast you respawn, how much you can paint continuously, how often you can use your sub or special weapon, how fast your special charges. The next factor is your weapon. This determines how you engage in fights generally, how much you can paint, how long your range is, what locations you'll be strongest in, like splatlings are super strong on grates, chargers are super strong if they can peek behind walls, what targets you can hit and in what range, what role you play, how fast you can charge your special, how useful that special is. The next factor I'd say is probably your teammates and your opponent's weapon choices. Next factor might be how your teammates start a match, then how they push a match, how the enemy reacts to that push, how they push, etc., 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 etc. There are tons of factors in every single game. The list goes on from macro to micro. The amount of information available at any 1 second of time could easily cause a sensory overload if you actively thought about all of it all the time, and it is the player's job to siphon out what is not important and what is. This leads me to the second concept, information processing and translation to action. Put way more simply, in-game adaptation. Basically, how you take all the info you gained by being aware and translating it into action during the game. To give you an example of how to process information, siphon the useful stuff out, and implement it, let's look at this snippet of gameplay of me playing X-Rank Clam Blitz. First, let's look at just this freeze frame of the beginning of the clip. What does the game tell us in just a single image? Let's find out. Alright, so looking at this frame, we can tell we're on Arowana Mall, and from there, let's go to the main HUD display at the top of the screen. Everyone is alive at this point, and only one person has special. Let's dive into the team compositions really quick. Both teams have 2 Tri-Sloshers, but the enemy team has an additional 2 weapons with burst bombs as well, so they can output quick chip damage and paint quite easily. My team lacks the amount of quick damage, but the Sploosh provides quick travel avenues with the curling bomb, and I offer, as a rapid, the longest range in the lobby, barely. Both teams will most likely use the double armor provided by the Tri-Sloshers to push in and use additional specials to complement. Shifting to the score, my team is in the lead by 12 with a 16-point penalty, so not a very sizable or stable lead. Just around half the match remains, so there's ample time to make a big push and secure a better lead. Now onto the last bit of HUD info in the top right corner. I have 0 clams and I'm about a third of the way to my special, so nothing really notable there. Now let's look at the positioning of my teammates and my opponents. My teammates are all relatively close to me, 2 on the main ramp to my left and 1 in the upper corridor to my right. The opposing team is positioned similar with 2 players on their main ramp and 1 in the upper corridor on the left. However, one of them is unaccounted for. The Hero Shot and Tri-Slosher on their main ramp are actively painting and pressuring the middle of the map, and the player on the top left is trying to move into our territory using the grates. Just that alone shows they are kind of antsy to push in and maybe try and score. Since I have ample range, I'm going to back up and apply pressure on the player using the grates, while I avoid the shorter range weapons with better mobility in mid. Let's see how that plays out. As you saw, I used my range to take out the Tri-Slosher, and then picked off the Grim Range Blaster from behind. My teammates cleaned up the other two, and we begin to push. I'm going to use my range to paint the corridor and lay down an ink mine to cover my own feet and possibly trap any eager opponents who rush to try and stop us from scoring. Let's see how our counter push plays out. Alright, I managed to get a double and an assist as my team extended our lead to a more sizable 40 points. We will return to this gameplay snippet in a bit, but for now, let's go over what we just saw. All of that information was from one frame of a game and then about 20 seconds of gameplay. Now, think about how much information is at your disposal in an entire 5-minute match. That's probably pretty mind-boggling, but by learning what to look at and what to look for, you'll be a better player in no time. This leads into the third concept of this video, reflection and adaptation. Another key part of growth as a Splatoon player is the ability to look back at your play and really dive deep into what you can adjust and do better, formulate a plan to implement it, and then, well, implement it. You can have godlike awareness and an insane ability to process information, but in the long run, a player who constantly reflects and adapts will be better. Let's say I use Splattershot and I play pretty aggressive. I'll probably be able to handle most encounters in most games. But if I get bodied by an enemy charger over and over and over again just because he knows how to capitalize on my aggression, well, what do? Well, if I'm a player who doesn't reflect and adapt, I might just try to keep rushing him, hoping that I'll eventually get him. But if I reflect and adapt, then I might try sharking more or poking him with bombs, adding more strategies to my toolkit. Granted, a lot of adaptations at a high level will not be as cut and dry as that, since those players' toolkits are chock full of strategies and adjustments accumulated over thousands of hours of playtime, some even for specific tendencies a certain opponent has. However, sometimes being too eager to adapt can backfire. Let's say you think you have a weakness against short-range weapons, so you decide to pick up a longer range weapon because, of course, long range beats short range. When in reality, you don't need to pick up a long range weapon to beat short range weapons. You just need to figure out why you're losing to short range weapons. You don't want to waste the time learning a long range weapon when you don't have to. Managing what, how, and why you adapt is just as important as adapting itself. And it's not just about tackling mistakes and weaknesses. Reflecting on what you did right is important too. Let's say you get a quad during an overtime push to win a really crucial game at the end of a long X-rank rotation. You want to look at that, break down what allowed you to do that. Was your positioning really good? Was your aim on point? Did you coordinate specials with your teammates like a god? Learning what you do good allows you to strengthen it even more and make it more effective. This, in turn, can cover your weaknesses too. You want to focus on both your strengths and your weaknesses because they play off of each other, thus giving you the ability to raise your skill floor and your skill ceiling at the same time. Let's go back to that gameplay snippet from earlier in the video for just a second. So what did I do right during this segment? I utilized my range to pick off the Tri-Slosher and capitalized on an overextension by the Grim Range Blaster to get another pick. Then, later on, I used my range again to get a double kill while we pushed into their corridor to try and score. But what did I do wrong? Well, I didn't pick up a single clam during our push, I wasted a bomb rush by using it too early, and I overextended by rushing the second Tri-Slosher in the corridor, which led to an unneeded death. What could I have done better? While I could have painted a bit more, grabbed some clams, deployed my bomb rush later on in our push to force the enemy back and not rush the Tri-Slosher. That would have probably resulted in me still being alive, maybe with some more splats and an even bigger lead. But what I did do right still resulted in my team getting a bigger lead. That is just a simple explanation of how both strengths and weaknesses can be examined and reflected upon in a match. Often, players will watch their gameplay back and just trash themselves as terrible without taking time to pat themselves on the back for the good plays, too. Make sure to take the good with the bad, as always focusing on your mistakes can force you to have a negative mindset and hinder your own growth. Now, the easiest way to reflect on your gameplay is obviously to record it, which is difficult if you don't have a capture card, but there are ways around that. Trust me. I used to set up a phone in front of my screen and record my matches and then re-watch them. The quality was abysmal, but that's not the point. Now, if you don't want to drain your phone's battery or you don't have a good camera on your phone, you can always just use the Switch's built-in clip function to capture 30-second snippets. But don't just clip the good stuff for montages. If you're shaking your head at a bonehead play or you're wondering how the hell someone splatted you, clip that too. Rewatch it, break it down. What did you do wrong? How can you fix it so that next time you don't get caught slacking? Another option more geared toward competitive players is to ask a friend with a capture card to spectate your private battles from your point of view. That way you can look at them afterwards, break them down, and see what you did wrong. Bottom line, if you want to improve, you can. It takes a lot of work and effort, and depending on who you ask, may or may not be worth it. But what are you waiting for? Jump into a lobby, be aware of what's happening, and adjust in and out of game, reflect and adapt, and remember to play your heart out. Thanks for watching, and make sure to obliterate that like button and demolish subscribe if you'd like to see more Splatoon content. I'm Jex. Have a good one.